Hey, it's Clayton from howtodrawcomics.net and welcome to my new series on drawing comic book styled demon spawn. In today's video, I'll be showing you my process for designing and creating a demon minion and exactly what went into the design process, how I took it from a preliminary, very rough and rudimentary sketch and developed it all the way through to some finely polished comic book art pencils. And of course, how to incorporate all the detail that goes into the ugliness and the creepy, juicy goodness of what makes a demon critter the charming creature that it is. I hope you enjoy the video, and I'll catch you in a bit. Alright, so in today's video we're going to be drawing demons, and for the first demon that I'll be drawing, I'm going to start out with a very rough sketch. Now, initially, I figured that I'd go for a bigger, more beastly looking demon, one that was, kind of a Hulk type demon, I guess you could say. Lots of horns there. You can see that mostly, as much as I am trying to capture a uniquely demon shape with that one, it was mostly just laying in the foundations of a basic mannequin model. You can see that I just erased the big dude and decided to go for a more golem-looking kind of demon. I guess I just didn't really like the way that the bigger Hulk demon was really turning out, so I switched it up a little bit and went for something a little more like creepy and ghoulish looking. And this is the result that I ended up with, and I very much liked the direction in which this demon was going, and so I did take a little bit of time to start to articulate some of the overall anatomy and to just lay in the basics. You can see that I'm keeping all of this very, very loose, very, very relaxed, really only focusing on getting the pose of the character down and making sure that the key notes of anatomy have been placed in to an extent where I could, go in and begin articulating it and working over it later on. Now, what you can see me doing here is laying in the foundations for a couple other demon sketches that I'll be doing up in this series. And for this one here, I'm going to have a guy who's just kind of sitting there in his chair, very depressed, kind of, holding a bottle of alcohol there, and he's kind of pissed off and hateful and sad, very susceptible to demon possession. And so what this is really going to be an illustration of is this kind of guy on the verge of becoming evil, being tempted and seduced by these very sexy and hot-looking demon sirens, I guess you could say, these seductive demonesses. And, that's just to add a little bit of sexiness to the piece. I think that the great thing about demons is that they can both look absolutely fugly and also rather seductive and sexy. And I do want to incorporate both of those things into these images. Of course, the dude demons do tend to look a lot uglier, I guess you could say, than the female demons. I'm not sure why that is. It's just a general aesthetic. Now you can see in the next sketch that I'm doing up is I'm going for a close-up shot of a demon head, and this is going to really give me an opportunity to incorporate a lot of gruesome, disgusting details, and to really go all out on a design that I think ultimately does turn out really, really cool, and it's one of the best demon illustrations I think that I've probably ever done. And the reason for that is I love designing creatures, and whenever I do jump into a new creature illustration where I'm designing a monster or a creepy critter of some kind, I do tend to go all out on the details, and it's always an excellent opportunity to kind of push my design skills a little bit and to see what I can come up with, see if I can think outside the box, so to speak. And above my 3/4 view demon portrait, I'm going to draw up another sketch. This one's going to be another demon chick, to put it bluntly, and she's again, I'm just placing in the very, very base level details here. You can see that there's a little bit of anatomy placed in there, but mostly it's just to get her sizing and composition on the page, and really, it's quite fast, but it gives me enough to work with to kind of take it to the next level, as I was saying. So over the top of this, I will ultimately build her anatomy to a more refined, more defined level of detail. But as you can see, I'm kind of noodling in a few of the details around the different illustrations that I've done up here, but now I'm really zooming in and focusing my attention in on the first demon that I'm going to basically detail out and articulate. And again, this is another monster creature demon, and this is really going to be fun to design because, I can go all out on the amount of detail I add in here and the structure. Demons, they don't have to look any particular way necessarily because they're fantasy creatures. They're kind of made up, as far as we know. But yeah, for the most part, this demon, as I was drawing him up, I was kind of thinking about, what kind of role would he play in a hellish demon society? What kind of demon would he be? And I think that rather than being a strong kind of demon, or a bodyguard kind of demon, this one's more of a weaselly demon, a demon that's kind of hunched over and very much like, Golem from the Lord of the Rings. He's kind of hunched over there, and he doesn't have a lot of... he's pretty ripped. He's ultimately going to have a little bit of muscle mass there, but he's not going to be as idealized or bulky as, some of the other more, muscly, Hulk-looking demons that I would otherwise draw. I really wanted to go for something that was a little bit different here to what I'd normally set out to do, just to, again, push my creativity and to see what I could come up with. And you can see me here laying in the shadows of some of the anatomy there and really trying to cast it down. And I am working on this sketch in a little bit of a different way than I would otherwise construct a piece of comic art. Normally I would place all of the anatomy in there and kind of work up the shadows and the rendering over the top of that. But here it looks as though I'm building it all up at the same time as I go, which... sometimes that's a preferable way for somebody to work. Other times it's a little bit disorganized, I think, because, at least if you're building up the anatomy and all the design work in different passes, you're able to kind of look at the image and see how it's coming together as it progresses in a much more wholesome way. Whereas if you're kind of detailing out different sections, you can see I'm already jumping onto the rendering of the horns there. It can tend to, part of the image will look really, really done, and then another part of the image won't be defined at all. And I guess when it comes to these more design sketches where you do have a much more lengthier rope in terms of the amount of creativity you can dump into a illustration, what ultimately ends up happening is that you can kind of build the artwork as you go, and that's very much what I'm doing. I don't have an overall design as such in mind for this demon. I'm kind of just making it up as I progress through the image, and I'm testing out, how different horn designs that I might be able to create, and I guess that's why I'm kind of rendering it out as I go, because if I can render it out as I go, I get a proper look at how the overall design is ultimately going to be presented, what kind of tones it's going to be presented in, etc., etc. And you can see that I've added a ton of detail to this demon's face and really tried to get a skeletal aesthetic here. And that just really dials up the creepy factor, I think. You can see that it looks like it's a little bit decayed and the flesh is just kind of hanging on there. And I love that disgusting look, and it's one of the reasons that I enjoy drawing monsters. You may not think it. A lot of the videos on this channel are actually, humanoid characters, and I guess that I really do push myself to do a lot of humanoid characters because I find that, they're a little bit more structured. They're a little bit more important to get right. And so I kind of had to practice them a bit more than these monsters, which I save for having fun, for my days off, I guess you could say. If I had my way, though, I'd draw creatures and monsters all day, every day. And in fact, I'm always inspired by them. And I think that maybe these designs allow me to kind of get my inner demons out onto the page because, damn, I feel that they're quite therapeutic. I feel like I'm at my most creative when I'm able to kind of let go, relax a little bit, and just take the design and see wherever it's going to go. Whereas I feel like when it comes to designing humanoid characters, I tend to put a little bit more pressure on myself to get it to look a particular way. With these creature designs, I really don't have to do that. It can kind of look however I want it to look, and oftentimes I don't know how it's going to look until I've completed it. And I think that that's a little bit more special as well, because ultimately, at the end of the day, what that means is I'm kind of surprised by the end of the illustration. I didn't realize or have any preconceived ideas as to how the design was going to end up, and so, by the end of the design stage, and by the time the illustration is done, I've got something there that came purely from my imagination in much more of a, I guess, improvised way. There was no real guide to follow, no real game plan to put into action, and that can be cool sometimes, because you don't necessarily, you end up with something that you never expected you'd have. So you can see me adding in a nice blend of muscle tone into this demon's anatomy, and it's blended in with this kind of skeletal, disgusting look. Makes it look like the flesh of his body is very, very thin and kind of stretched over the underlying anatomy and muscle that's been placed in there. And I really do like that look. I guess when it comes to these particular type of creature designs, I try to go for something which is going to appear a bit more disturbing for the viewer. And I think that whenever you can add in the underlying anatomy into the artwork and kind of integrate it into the design, it does tend to create a disturbing effect, because one of the most disturbing things to think about is how somebody would look if they had no flesh lathed over the top of them. And that's really the effect that we're getting here. You can see the muscle structure there, kind of, and all the stretching that's going on there is very articulated in comparison to how a real person would actually look. And this is comic book art, so that's often the case with all comic book characters, whether they be creatures or whether they be monsters or actual superheroes. The anatomy is going to be articulated to an extent, but maybe not this much. You can see that I'm adding in some rendering now, making sure that, again, the overall design is going to look correct in its final presentation, and that's why I'm kind of jumping forward to rendering out some of the anatomy there. I feel like maybe I can balance it out and structure it as I design the artwork, because now that I've got the amount of shadow established and the amount of rendering placed in there that I want to take the final presentation of the artwork to, I can kind of keep that in mind as I bring the rest of the design to the same level of being finished. And that's important for me, because I guess at the end of the day, we want the artwork to read correctly. We want it to read as a whole. We can't have one area of the design where the materials are all super shadowy and dark, and then another area where it's kind of not very detailed at all. Of course, we want to make sure that we're keeping in mind the lighting of the actual artwork and how everything's lit, and there's inevitably going to be areas of highlight and areas of shadow, no doubt, but I think, ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that that's being lit consistency across the board. His clothes may, for example, be a different material. They may be a darker material, for instance, and a darker material will require additional levels of shadow and rendering in comparison to a lighter material. But, that's all. That's all just part of the comic art game. You got to balance it out with the black and white tones that you've got there to use. You can see me adding in some scaly looking disgusting textures over the top of that muscle there, and that's because I didn't want to make it look as though this dude just had a basic kind of skin. I wanted it to look more creaturely, and I think that those additional scales do add to that, almost like a lizard reptilian overall aesthetic. And that really does, I think, produce that effect here, which I'm quite happy with. I think that, at the end of the day, when it comes to designing these demons, the more, at least the guy demons, the more kind of details and textures that you can add in there, the more creepy they're going to look. So, but of course, all of that additional kind of element that make up the overall design. You know, this guy is obviously not a normal dude. He doesn't have the normal anatomy of a man, but at the same time, if you look at where all the bits and pieces of anatomy is placed, you know, the deltoids, the pecs, the abs, all of that does follow the conventional structure of a human being. And that's so that, you know, the viewer can relate with what they're looking at. Again, one of the reasons this dude looks so creepy is because the underlying anatomy is so visible underneath the flesh. But you can see all those different muscles and tendons, you know, really starting to pop through there. And the rendering that I've placed in to articulate that anatomy only accentuates that kind of look that I've gone for. So it's looking considerably disgusting, which is exactly what I want. You can see me mixing up the texture details a little bit more here as well as I place in the kind of thorny, spiky forms that I'm placing onto the forearm there. And that, again, it kind of adds to that, I don't know what you would call it, kind of like the armor that the Greeks would wear, the metal armor that the Greeks would wear around their forearms back when they did that. You know, I'm placing that in. It's kind of like, it does look like armor, I think, you know, around his arm. And I'm kind of suggesting that as well. Like, if this guy, you know, hit you with his forearm, it'd probably hurt a lot, but it also is a much harder looking material. Same with his shoulders as well. And of course, probably the top of his head. It's going to be a lot more bony and a lot more resistant to impact. You know, and I think that I do want to give it that bony looking, very hard textured look, and that's mostly to just show that we're dealing with a creature here that does look kind of measly and weak, but at the same time is structured pretty solidly. You know, you'd still, you know, putting this guy against a normal person would probably not end well for the human, but the demon could definitely take care of itself. Is ultimately the suggestion that I'm trying to make here. And I think when it comes to designing more creaturely type characters, if you look at the world around you, all creatures kind of have these interesting elements that is a part of their anatomy that help them to defend themselves and kind of help them to adapt within their environment in a way in which they can survive. And I think that if you can incorporate that into a creature design, it's going to give you a nice kind of blend of humanoid, as you can see here within this demon character, but also it's going to introduce that more animalistic creature element as well, and ultimately result in a half animal, half man type aesthetic, which translates to beast, which is exactly what this dude looks like. He looks like a bit of a beast. And you can see that I've added in the shadows that are going to be cast by the anatomy. And rather than rendering out that anatomy, I'm just jumping straight over to the other leg, which is, you know, often how I will typically work when it comes to designing comic book characters or drawing comic art in general. I kind of, you know, I'm going to bring these legs to the same level of being shadowed and then go over with a rendering pass and start to, you know, really detail out the different tones and shading that will be created by the anatomy based on the various forms and, of course, the lighting direction that the light source is shining onto the character from. And I'm really trying to overlap the shadows and this anatomy in a way that does look accurate. You can see that I'm not using the same amount of thickness or density for all of those shadows. They are getting thicker and they are getting lighter according to the light direction and the amount of light that is being placed onto the character's various anatomy forms. And I think that you always want to keep in mind the secondary forms and the overall core forms of the anatomy as you work. Remember that overall, the leg and the arms and the overall torso really is just basically consisting of a cylindrical form there. And that cylindrical form does obviously come into play with the lighting. Remember that the muscles are all surrounding this cylindrical form and that they're going to be, you know, at the mercy essentially of that underlying form. So basically, as the muscles actually wrap around the cylindrical form and the lights is projected down onto that cylindrical form, all of those muscles need to be shaded consistently. So on the darker side of that cylindrical form, the muscles are going to have thicker shadows, and on the lighter side of that cylindrical form, they're going to get lighter and lighter and more subtle, which is why some of the contours of the muscles have been defined and why other parts have not been defined. So here I am, it's starting to render out the anatomy a little bit there, and it's the same deal with the shadows. I'm placing in longer rendering lines for the larger forms of muscle, and also where those forms actually transition into the shadowed area of the overall cylindrical form that they're built upon. And here and there, I'm placing in additional spiky, horny, thorny textures just to increase the amount of, I guess, dangerous. When you add spiky, jagged kind of lines to a character, most of the time they're going to have much more of a dangerous feel to them. They're going to appear much more, I guess, for example, if you think of any creature which has spikes or horns on them, it's usually those areas of the creature that you have to watch out for. It's a defense mechanism, whether you're talking about plants or actual creatures. So that's why we've kind of associated that actual aesthetic visual appearance to being something which is dangerous. And so I'm adding that into the demon design here just to make it look like, yeah, this dude is dangerous. He's sharp looking. If you run into this guy, he's probably going to use some part of his body to mess you up. Which he easily could. I mean, when you look at all the spikes that he's got here, I'm surprised that he doesn't prick himself. I imagine that is something he has to watch out for. But, it'd be hard for this guy to go to social events, I think, because he'd always be, he'd have to keep his distance from everybody else. Otherwise, he'd end up injuring them in some way, I think. Now I'm jumping over to focus in on some of the clothing and costume design that I've decided to create for this character, and I've tried to go for a mix of something which is obviously cloth. It looks like cloth, but I also wanted it to look a little bit otherworldly as well. And I think that the different kind of gem and jewel structures that I've composed there over the top of the fabric that make up his I guess little dress lap thing that he's got going on. I'm not sure what you'd call that really, but I'm not sure really on the technical names of a lot of this stuff that I'm placing in, to be quite frank with you. I know that he needs something there to cover himself up with. He likes to dress appropriately for a gathering, but I guess at the end of the day, what I am trying to do here with these different kind of, additional assets, pieces of jewelry, is to give them a unique look that does say to the viewer, hey, this guy is not of this realm, he is not of this world, and he does, I almost want these different elements of jewelry to actually look otherworldly and to make it look as though you can see that the actual architecture of the design of that jewelry is very sharp looking, especially around the belt area. Even the buckle is literally full of spikes, which just adds to the overall dangerous appearance that I'm trying to go for with his overall aesthetic. So I'm adding in some shadows and rendering for the cloth there, and that takes practice to get looking right sometimes. Sometimes you have to balance it out. Obviously, this material here, if I was to color it up and I was to show you what that actually looks like in a final presentation, it'd probably consist of a rather dark material, because it would only be dark materials that really have shadows that are this defined and this at this density. Same deal with the rendering. That rendering that I'm placing in there is quite dense, and you can see that you know, I guess at the end of the day, it does create a nice contrast in comparison to the overall anatomy of the character. Most of the anatomy of the character isn't that densely packed with rendering. There's still a lot of rendering there, so he'd probably have a moderately dark tone to his skin, but the material you can see if you squint your eyes is of a darker tone, and those highlight areas of the character's body are actually the things that stand out in contrast to those darker areas. So now I'm adding in a very dangerous looking design for his tail there. I decided to opt for almost a scorpion-like tail, where he's got a bit of a stinger, and pretty much he'll probably end up attacking his opponents with that tail. It looks like it could definitely do some damage, and it's definitely something I wanted to add in there to bring across that impression. Again, it just, you know, it adds to that dangerous look that I've gone for with him, but I think that I'm still trying to figure out exactly how the rest of that tail is going to look and appear, because I don't want it to necessarily be following the same pattern all the way around. I want it to be a bit of a mix, and I think when you can mix up design elements like that, like the way in which I've added various textures to the actual body itself, and of course that spiky looking bone structure that is coming off various parts of the character's anatomy, it creates some visual contrast within the image, and people love contrast. They like to be able to look at different things. If everything just looks the same, it lacks a certain level of interest. So if you can composite a range of different elements into the one design that visually look interesting, then ultimately what you will end up with is a design which has a little bit more depth to it and a little bit more there for the viewer to sink their eyeballs into when it comes to the overall final presentation. So that just about wraps it up for this first demon illustration that I've created for you. Just a little bit of fun. I usually create these characters when I'm, you know, a little bit more relaxed and I'm winding down and I just want to chill out for a little bit, because they're honestly fun to do. I hope that you did get a lot out of this demo and that you enjoyed it. And we'll hopefully see you for the next demon demonstration, where I'll be drawing up the female demon over to the direct right hand side of the demon that we've just wrapped up on. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up below and leave your thoughts in the comments section underneath the video. And if you'd like to be kept in the loop on up-and-coming tutorials, tips, and tricks from howtodrawcomics.net, be sure to head over to the site and subscribe. Until next time, I'll catch you later.